And with the ring of the bell, welcome to our imaginary one-room Royal Oak School. We'll begin with a history lesson. The story of the Oldfield family in the Saanich area. So, next slide. I'm not an Oldfield. What am I doing here? Rob asked me to introduce the history of the family. Well, when I was born, when I was 3 weeks old, my mom died. My grandmother came into the family to take care of me, and my aunts drew close. So on the right, standing is my Aunt Mirth, a single woman with a career in nursing. And on her right, my left, is Aunt Joy. And there's the connection right away. Aunt Joy married Dick Oldfield, my Uncle Dick, and helped with raising me. Now, this is my cousin Gay Oldfield. Many of you would remember her from Royal Oak, a member of the 1962 Claremont graduating class, lived at the end of Pipeline Road. And at the time that I was born, she and her family, her parents, were living on our property in a trailer. So Gay and I grew up more as siblings than as cousins. Next slide. So there's Uncle Dick. You know, it wasn't just Aunt Joy who drew closer, Uncle Dick. And here we've got me, we've got cousin Gay, and Gay's cousin. So that's Kathy and Nancy and Kathy. So the Oldfields had a property on the waterfront out at Central Saanich, and each year, each of the uncles would come with their family and spend a week there in the cottage. And so Gay's first cousins became my first cousins. Next slide. Now, this is where we start our history lesson. And in genealogy, you always start with the most recent and work your way back. So at the bottom, we've got the fourth son of Henry Clarence. So Uncle Toby, he did not marry. He had a successful career teaching in universities, mostly down in California. Next up, Uncle Jim married Mildred. Jim also had an academic career. He started off at UBC as a student, went into agricultural teaching, and wound up down at Corvallis, Oregon, where he was in charge of the agricultural college in Corvallis, Oregon. But every summer up they came, and every summer I went with my cousins down to visit them. Richard Clarence, Uncle Dick. So of course he was the closest, being Aunt Joy's husband, married Joy Doyle, and their two children grew up at the end of Pipeline Road and attended Royal Oak School. So Gay is running the loom up at Duncan, Whippletree Junction. She's still got her shop going up there. And Dan had a full career with the Saanich firefighters on the ambulance crew. And then at the top, the firstborn son, notice the names Henry, John. Those names come up with the firstborn son over and over again, every generation. But Herbert was his third name, and everybody called him Herb, or Uncle Herb. He, as the firstborn son in a rather conventional, conservative British family, was given the choice of either becoming a minister in the Anglican Church or joining the army. If you ever met Herbert, you know that his heart was with the people in the church. He really wanted to be a doctor, but he turned up out to minister to the souls rather than the body, and did a darn good job of it. Starting on the prairies, he had a career up in the Duncan Cowichan area, and after he retired, I do remember seeing in the newspaper that he was doing blessings of the animals out at St. Stephen's Church. So that's the 4 boys who grew up in the lodge, Norfolk Lodge out on Oldfield Road. And their parents, Henry Clarence, born in Winnipeg, was the firstborn son, all 4 of those, all of his siblings were born in Winnipeg. And he married a Doris Oldfield. Yes, that is correct that her surname was Oldfield, and we'll get to that later. But John Henry Oldfield was born in Norfolk to an extensive family. He was born at Caldecott Farm, and that's where the name of the road, Caldecott Road, comes from. When that property was developed, needed a name for a road, it's the name of his birthplace. If you want to hear how he came to Saanich, you'll have to go on our YouTube, and that tells the story via Suriname. I'll leave you to find that out on your own. And then John Henry, see the word Henry, his father was Henry, known as Harry, and solidly in Norfolk. Next slide. Okay, now we'll start at the bottom again. So we've got Henry Clarence, we've got John Henry, the first of the Oldfields to come to the Saanich area, and the one who built Norfolk Lodge. We've got his father, Henry or Harry, and then a most interesting couple, Henry and Sarah. Look at Edmund. So Edmund had 3 boys and 3 girls. None of the girls married. There's the 3 boys, Henry, Edmund, and James. Henry never married either, but he is running a huge farm. I mean, over 1,000 acres. This is in Norfolk. How many 1,000-acre farms can you carve out of Norfolk? Well, the Oldfields owned a couple of them. So Henry, childless, living with his maiden sisters in this huge place. Look at Edmund. So he died in 1812, and Sarah, his daughter, was only 5 years old. Uncle Henry took her in. He adopted her. So she went to live with Henry and his 3 maiden aunts. Now look at James. He died in 1821, leaving a son, Henry, who was 15 at the time. Again, Uncle Henry adopted him, and he too was raised in the big house. Now, if you want to go, that's as far back as we're going. If you want to go back further, Rob Oldfield and I have been careful to make sure that the Saanich archives have a copy of anything that we have. And that can take you all the way back to, what is it, 600 AD or something like that, with some supporting documents. Central Saanich Archives have a smaller group of artifacts out there. Ancestry is a bit of a problem because most people went off the rails. But yes, there are Oldfield genealogies on Ancestry. And the Royal Oak Schoolyard blog, 10 years ago, I did a talk, totally, utterly boring. I mean, it mentions every single child born in every single generation. I mean, if you want to sit through and slog, but there are some little gems in there. Like I say, the story of how John Henry wound up in Saanich. Just a marvelous story. And stories about a man who married a black woman. Horrors, took her back to England. She was not welcome to take tea. Goodness. Next, thank you. Okay, so Henry and Sarah had 13 children. We'll only talk about 3 of them quickly because only 3 of those branches had an influence in Saanich. Okay, so the Henry or Harry Oldfields lived his whole life in England. John Henry was the firstborn, and then there were 8 more children. But we'll only look at John Henry because he's the one who came out to Saanich. He married Emma Inman in Ontario. She was UEL, United Empire Loyalists. Now, they had 4 children. They were all born in Winnipeg. Kathleen, the oldest, she never married. She was Aunt Kathleen and lived with Clarence in Norfolk Lodge. I have her 5-year diary for the last 2 years of her life. You might think a single woman in a family, a well-to-do family, might be kind of bored. That woman was so busy. One of the things that she did within the community was she belonged to the WA, the women's. So she was the one who initiated the plan during the First World War to have a commemorative plaque for the men in those days. So Kathleen was the one who came up with the idea that we should be commemorating the men who had gone off to the First World War. So this is before the war is over. But she proposed a plaque which is now down at the Saanich Archives. And that was before one of her brothers was lost in the war. So Herbert, the baby of the family, did not come home. He died in April of 1918. And Edmund, who had gone off to war with him, survived and did become an alcoholic. They called him Uncle Juicy. A most fascinating character. I call him the other Oldfield. And we've got a whole box of correspondence that chronicles his adventures out in the world. And we've got Henry. Okay, now let's look at the next slide. Okay, so we've looked at one line down, and that of John Henry, the oldest of the 13, coming down that line. Oh, did you notice that that the father was born in 1828? The next one we're looking at, same family, but George is born in 1848. When you have that many children, takes a bit of time. So there was a full generation between the oldest one and the youngest brother, George. He married Sarah Knights, and they had 10, and those included, and I'm only mentioning the ones who came to Saanich, Bertha married Henry Abbott, and I shouldn't say she came to Saanich. It was her son Michael came out to Saanich. He lived at Brentwood Bay. He was a very well-respected builder. And there are Abbotts around on the island still. Number 2, Isabel. She married Shirley Hobbs. Now that was a masculine name, like Marion was a masculine name back in those days. But they did come to Victoria, and you may remember Isabel Hobbs as being a painter in this area. If you go online and look at the Victoria Sketchers Club website, you'll see copies of her art or pictures of her art. And one thing that I learned is that she was a confidant of Emily Carr. And when you're reading Emily Carr's histories and they speak about her listening ladies, Isabel was one of them. And if you know the story of Emily Carr at all, you know she was a bit difficult to get along with sometimes. But Isabel stuck with her. And then number 4 is Kenneth John, always known as Jack. And he came out to Saanich and again was a respected builder. Now he had 3 children. I mentioned them here. You probably never heard of the first one. The second one, Kip Wallace. Does that ring a bell for anyone? Probably. She was well known in Victoria within fashion and early TV. Now the third one, Rosamond Joan Helena, was born the 18th of March 1925 and married into the de Gouttière, the goldsmiths, the jewelers. So you'll recognize her married surname. Now, what happened is that she was the very first baby born in a brand new maternity wing of the Royal Jubilee Hospital. Look at her initials, R.J.H. But the Times newspaper got it wrong. They called her Ruth Joan Helen, and they said that she was born to Mr. and Mrs. Clarence Oldfield of Elk Lake. They got the parents wrong. But we know better, don't we? Anyway, next slide, thank you. There we are. There's the piece that was in the paper. So I'm going to get them to print a retraction. It's about time. It's about time. Next slide. Now the Walter Oldfields, this is what you've been waiting for, is the Walter Oldfields. Okay, married Jane Taylor. Now it says 16 children, but Uncle Herbert said there were 17. They had 9 or 10 at the time when he brought his family all to Winnipeg. Now imagine in those days trying to travel with 9 children from Norfolk to Manitoba. But they did it. There were a couple more born in Winnipeg. And then Walter, after establishing a farm and getting all settled, more children, there was a death of an older relative in England. He inherited another one of these huge spreads. They picked up and went back to England. But of their children, 2 are of note to us. So Edith Mary was born in Norfolk and she married to Richard Mason Palmer. There's a whole afternoon of history on the Palmers. They were involved in agriculture at the local level, at the provincial level, the experimental farm in Summerland, for example, and also at a federal level with institutions to do with agriculture. But this is where we've been waiting to get. So Horace Taylor was born in Norfolk, came out to Winnipeg, went back with his family, but then came back to the Saanich area. And in fact, he is, when he died in 1950, he is buried just outside here at Royal Oak at St. Michael's. And last slide. So here, Horace Oldfield, three children. Basil was known as Barney. There was a famous car racer named Barney Oldfield, so he got the nickname Barney. Barbara, who did marry, so her family is the Page family. And then Percy Bryan, notice they all chose their middle names, married Nora Elliott. Next slide. And that's where the history lesson ends, and you get to go out to recess with Rob and his family.
My grandparents, Horace and Edith, which I gather were married in the church on Prospect Lake Road that is now a house. And I just talked to the people who are living in that house this morning because he just happened to drop in, and they still have the cross from that church from many, many years ago. So 3 children, as we've just said here, my dad, my Uncle Basil, and my Aunt Barbara. So Aunt Barbara, I was just going to read a little bit here of her. They basically all lived in this area forever. So Aunt Barbara, regular attendance at St. Michael's Anglican Church. Barbara taught Sunday school beginning at age 12 in a little home school at Prospect Lake. Became a Girl Guide leader at Royal Oak and junior auxiliary leader at St. Columba's Church. After training at Vancouver's Infant Hospital, nursed at Solarium in Mill Bay and worked for the Red Cross Home Emergency Service for 7 years. Nursed at Tolmy, Sandringham, Clovelly, and George Hospitals, and married, and 2 boys, Brian and Bruce, both in the States now. Brian, the oldest. Oh, look at you go. Nice. Okay, Brian, the oldest. Worked for my dad for a few years, and then off he went, married, had children, lived in Seattle for the rest of his life. He's in trouble now, health-wise, but he's still going down there. Bruce got into journalism, and he moved down to California and was teaching at the university down there, and he is still down there. So that was Barbara, and my Aunt Barb died in 2004, I guess. So then it's my dad and my uncle. So I'll go into my dad. So married 1950 or so. Oh, okay. Whoa, yes, here again, okay. Myself and my sister Arlene, who you'll hear from. Mom, super. So I guess he started, my uncle was 2 years older than my father. So Basil was 2 years older than Brian. When Basil graduated from school, grade 12, he started building the gas bar at Prospect Lake. And 2 years later, whenever it was, when my, how are you so in time with me? This is amazing.
I'm with you.
2 years later, this is either my dad or my uncle, not sure, but we're thinking that's opening day. Waited for my dad to graduate from grade 12, and June of 1934, they opened the gas bar. And we were the second oldest gas bar on the peninsula, I think, until the Cunninghams shut it down. Where is he? Anyway, there you are, way back there, Gary. All right, yeah. So I think now we're the oldest on the peninsula. But anyway, so they started running the gas bar, and they both ran it until the war. And then my dad went to Halifax and started fixing cars over there. My uncle stayed here, and he was into designing, which we're going to get into here a little bit, all sorts of strange things. And when Dad came back from the war, he opened up the gas bar again, and my uncle built that building in behind and got into his world. My quick story, I guess, is I'm in second year university, didn't really know where I was going. I was sort of always good at math. I think I was leaning towards astronomy because I was always, as a kid, climbing the hill behind our house up to the observatory that was up there, and it was just fascinating. So I'm 20 years old, and my dad gets cancer, and given 6 months. And so, of course, your dad wants your only son to take over the family businesses, and of course, you're not going to say no to your dying dad. Thinking in the back of my mind that once he'd gone, I'd lease the place out. I kept taking university courses for 10 years or so in the evenings. Never really, I can't really think of a time that I actually sat down to try to think, am I going to give this up and go back to school and go on to whatever my career was? And that was 51 years ago, and I'm still there. And I love it. You know, I'm 71 now. It's a small community, you know everybody. It's, you know, it gives me a purpose and activity, and so I'm there for the foreseeable future. I have a lady, Tara Harris, that has been with me for 20 years, and she's going to take it over. But I'm still happy there. Geraldine and I, not that we ever got married, but we've been together for 30 years.
So Arlene Oldfield is me, and we're going to start here with the pictures. I was going to start again with the pictures of my dad Brian's mom and dad, but you've already, there they are, so that's all cool. And then I was going to go next to, yeah, thank you, Christy. And then just give you a quick kind of idea of, you know, my life, I guess. I was born in October '53, had a great childhood, grew up at 5265 West Saanich with dear brother Rob there. And we had lots of places to play. He already mentioned the Little Saanich Mountain because we spent quite a bit of time just exploring around there. So it was fantastic. Dad, with his gas station there, was really convenient for us because it was only 3 houses down from our place. So we could just kind of skirt down the side of the road to go visit him, or when we started school, then we'd just whip across West Saanich and go to the old Prospect Lake School, which is now gone. But it was just a little 2-story, 2-room schoolhouse, and the basement had just a dirt floor kind of thing. So as the population grew, we went down to the bottom of the school, and it was just like a 3-bedroom school. It was so tiny. So then I was there till grade 7, and then they built the new Prospect Lake School on Prospect Lake Road. However, I wasn't able to go there because there was too many kids. So then I was shipped off to Beaver Lake here for a year, which was a little disturbing on account of all my friends were still. But anyway, so then got through that and then went to Mount Newton for a couple of years, and which they're torn down now as well, right? Let's go on. And then off to Claremont. So that was my schooling. I started work, you could call it, at I think about 13 or 12, delivering newspapers all over Prospect Lake. And that was Saturday morning, the Sun or the Star or something it's called. And then I worked at the Conch Pheasant for Mrs. Sowden, who moved across the road here, actually right on the corner after she left the restaurant. So I was there, you know, serving tea when I was 13. That was fun. And because she made delicious food. So then when I was able to drive, obviously got my license at 16, and then I started working at Woodward's whilst I was still in school, and moved from there on to motor vehicle branch after I graduated. So I was there for about 5.5 years. During that time, let's see, I met my future husband here, Tim Lindsay, just about the time, well, we're not quite here yet, darling, but just about the time when my dad got ill. And contrary to what Rob, I thought they said that he had about 4 years after he was diagnosed with cancer, but he did last 4 years. Yeah, so I was 22 when he passed away. Meanwhile, met this fella here, and so we just kind of, spent the next 9 years getting to know each other, and then here we are. We got this far, so all that's good. We got married in 1985. We had lots of fun during those 9 years of getting to know each other. We had an airplane, a Cessna 150, and we traveled down to the Baja and had a boat on the gorge. And right off the get-go in '78, we circumnavigated North America in a Volkswagen van. So that was a really good way to get to know each other. So then we kind of settled down in 1990. We had our first daughter, Marina, and then we had our second daughter in '92, which is Christy, which is, yes, doing the PowerPoints. Good on her. We were living at the time over on the Gorge Waterway, and decided we didn't want to bring our children up in Esquimalt. So we wanted to kind of come out to the peninsula. So Mom, bless her, said, why don't you build on this property that her mom and dad moved to. That's us. Those are the lovelies. So cute. So this is Mom's mom and dad. And they purchased 17 acres out on Wallace Drive. And that farmhouse is still there. Anyway, so Mom says, why don't you come and build out here on some of this property and raise the children out there? So we cleared some land and built a house. And we were there for 15 years. The kids went to Durant's, which is no longer a school. And then on to Bayside and then Stellies. But, and then when the kids kind of grew up, we downsized and built another house on that 17 acres to start with. At this point in time, our eldest, sure go ahead, got married in 2014, and they've got 2 kids. So these guys are living in the old farmhouse on the original 17 acres there, which is downsized now, whatever. So it's wonderful to have this part of the family and those lovely grandkids right next door to us, which is fantastic. And so that's, pretty much Christy is now living in the roundhouse that Basil built. This fantastic house, and absolutely loving it. So we've got, the family's all nice and close and living in, ancestral places. Rob got in there.
Oh, look at that. Isn't that cute?
Yeah. So that's about it for me. That's a quick story on where I'm at.
So I am a newcomer to the Oldfield family, bumping into this gal here who I used to say that she was in charge. I was in charge of business and adventure, and she was in charge of expansion. And so you could tell that she's got a wheelbarrow full of seedlings here. And she was in charge of that department, and she did a very lovely job of that. The next slide I want to talk about for you gearheads out there, that's a name for a guy guy that is likes cars and stuff like that, is that there is a website about Uncle Basil that I'm sure you'll be interested in, spiritoftomorrow.com, and that's why I put that up there. I only had one really good encounter with Uncle Basil, and we met at Arlene's mom's Nora's house, and he found out that I was a member of the flying club, and we had an airplane. I don't know if we had one before or after there, but he convinced me that the best thing we could possibly do was for me to go to the flying club and rent a 172 that could go up to 10,000 feet and fly over and keep an eye on the Sasquatch that it was on Mount Baker. True story, I'm not making this up. So anyway, we got to a Saturday and we agreed on a day, and I'd made arrangements at the flying club, and we got up into the airplane. On the way to the flying club, we had to stop at the little general store there at the corner, and where he loaded up his pockets full of chocolate bars. And I said, well, what's all that all about? And he looked at me very seriously, and he said, that's in case we crash. Okay, all right. So anyway, we got in the plane and we flew up there, and we flew up to Mount Baker. Now, the house that Basil built, the round house that spins, looks out onto Mount Baker, so he's got an eye on this mountain at all times. And he says, I think there's steam coming out of it today. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I'm gonna wait for it. So we flew around the back of the mountain, and sure enough, that Mount Baker is almost always giving off some steam, some of it very small in some cases, but in some cases it's all of a sudden makes the news down in Seattle because they think it might blow or something like that. So we're driving around, I said, look, and he's hitting me at the side of, this plane's not very big, huh? So he's giving me one of these. He said, look. He said, I'm looking, I don't know what I'm looking for, and I'm looking, and he says, look, there's footprints in the snow. That's the Sasquatch's footprints. True story. And then we flew back to Victoria. That was my exciting time with Uncle Basil. And Arlene and Rob gave me the honor of going to his Quonset hut after he'd passed away when we got back from traveling. And I gathered up all the little books and pieces of paper and pictures, and he took a lot of pictures. And I have all those with me that haven't got away. I didn't want any of that stuff to get away. And so I'll eventually get them all put up on the website there so people like you guys can enjoy that. So there's my story about the Oldfields and Uncle Basil. Thank you. Yeah.
As you can tell, we have stories for days. You might have to schedule a round 2 of this, because I know there are folks who have shown up here today who had the pleasure of knowing my family and my ancestors. I unfortunately did not get to meet many of them, as they had passed before I'd been born. So it means a lot to me to have people show up today and to want to share their stories. And so I know there's more to come, and we'd love to come back. So my name is Christy Erin Oldfield Lindsay. I am the daughter of Arlene Oldfield, whose ancestry we're breathing life into today. And my father is Tim Lindsay, who has, become an honorary Oldfield, and who has spent a lot of time getting to know the different aspects of our family. And I appreciate all that he's preserved as well, that I get to learn about today. Most of my learnings is through these photos, through the articles that have been written about my family, and they've all been saved by my family. And so preparing for this was a wonderful experience for me. As an adolescent, when I was maybe 14, 15, 16, I had the chance to work at my Uncle Rob's gas station, which is what it was at the time. And that was my first experience of kind of getting a sense of the impact that my family has had on the area. Hearing about people who have known my grandfather, and they would come in every week, and to see the sense of kindness and generosity that goes out into the community that comes from this little gas station, and from what I understand has always been that place for people to come and join. And that was the first experience that I had had of really a community where people knew each other. And it was an honor for me. Every Saturday, my grandma, who still lived next door, she would walk past the gas station, and someone, whoever was working there, would walk her over next door to the cafe to ensure her safety, and then walk her home after. And that was really where I got a sense of what our family has meant to people in the community. And for the past 3 years now, I have had the privilege of being the resident at the roundhouse that was spoken about today. And so I kept this picture up here of Horace Basil Oldfield. He is my great uncle, who I did not get to meet. And it's been a privilege for me to sort of satiate myself in what I understand to be an incredibly brilliant man, and who was an engineer and an innovator like this area had never seen. I have a story here from a man named Gary Mooney, who has been in the community since he was a boy. His family has been in the community, and he has always spoken so highly of Basil Oldfield. He learned a lot from him as a boy, and he has spent a lot of his time preserving many of the machines and inventions that Uncle Basil built. And so I wanted to share his story that he sent in for us to give credit to the relationship that he had with Basil as well. So this is written in from Gary Mooney. Do I have time? Are we good? Basil was a true gentleman. He was courteous, honest, inquisitive, and caring. I never heard him say an unkind word or swear. Lauren McNutt used to kid him about it. Basil said he did not see any purpose in foul language. He liked to fly and owned a war surplus Cornell trainer and later a Globe Swift. He called his Swift Little Mustang, as it was all metal and had a low wing like a fighter. He flew with Norm Copley, Claude Butler, and others in the flying club. Butler's had a field at Keating and one in Souk near the end of the Butler, Maine logging road. Norm Copley had a field at Royal Oak, where Copley Park is now. The Keating field was the current gravel pit. He was a mechanical wizard, exploring innovative ways to improve the workplace and people's lives, always intrigued by new technologies and developments, always curious. He developed a telescope TV antenna for butlers at Keating to help sell TVs and antennas. They would pull it into your yard, tip it up, and crank an antenna way up and show you all the channels: Vancouver, Seattle, Tacoma, and Czech, of course. It worked well. It's sitting waiting restoration in the yard at his round steel rotating house on Old West Saanich Road, my home. He built a steel house, that's right, that rotates 360 degrees, and it got passed by Saanich. He also built and ran a local waterworks from the corner of West Home Road. It served West Home and Fairholme. I think the well might still be there. When Sputnik went up, he slept outside with an alarm clock to see it go overnight. He took up Russian as a language. In the Depression, using a homemade gas engine electric welder, he made tractors for local farmers and kept their implements running. At the time, he started tinkering with building a better car. It took a while to build with various test beds to try out ideas. The result was the aerodynamic Spirit of Tomorrow, or the bomb, as some locals call it. Rear engine, 2-speed differential, aluminum body, hydraulic brakes, windshield wipers, windshield defrost, brake lights, flashing turn signals, which were the first of their time, way ahead of his time for the day. During the war, he made a huge contribution locally to the logging industry. He built one of the first boom boring augers to drill holes in boom logs for the chains. He modified a chainsaw powerhead, and made the gear train to drive the auger bit. He modified and made many bulldozer blades to use steel cable for the lift, as hydraulics were impossible to get. He repaired hundreds of bits of machinery as parts were not available. He made towed gas-driven electric welders from salvaged engines and rewound car starters. They kept the loggers working by repairing broken equipment. He also made welding helmets, as they were unavailable due to the war effort. He made logging arches from salvaged pipes and beams. They had huge homemade steel wheels because of the rubber shortage. An old motor transmission truck rear end for a front axle, and with Basil designed rear steering, he made one of the first forklifts ever for Butler's yard at Keating. He was an example and a credit to the local community, and to all who knew him. There's more information and pictures of all of those various different things that he made for those who are interested on the spiritoftomorrow.com website. But it was important to me to read this out to share the breadth of ways that he was supportive of the community with what they had at the time, and to use his brilliance wherever sort of was needed and forever it was needed for. He wasn't a big social guy. When he did pass, it's my understanding that we didn't hold a funeral for him, and so I wanted to spend extra time today to share about his life and the various contributions that he made. That's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Claire Reynolds, and I actually met Rob in 1979. At that time, my name was Claire Langford. I had 2 kids. They were 4 and 5 years old, and I was a new single parent. I had lived out here before, when I was married to my first husband. I wanted to stay in this neighborhood. But in 1979, a single parent at Prospect Lake School was unheard of. I mean, it was just unheard of. I only worked half-time. I got no child support, so money was an issue. But I was determined that I was going to find a place to live out here. There just was really hard. So I went to the gas station because I thought, this guy that works at the gas station, he probably knows everything that's going on around here, right? Was I ever right? And I just was going to put up a little notice, but I got talking to Rob, and I knew about the roundhouse. It was famous back then. And I also knew that it was empty. He mentioned that it was empty. He says, but you wouldn't want to live there. He said, it's really, really kind of strange, and there's no heat. And I said, try me. Anyway, I ended up moving in there, and yes, it was different, but I got to know Basil just from being in that house. I, of course, had never met him. I don't know if any of you have ever been in the roundhouse, but it's all metal 2x4s, and on the inside it's paneling. There's no insulation. At that time, there was no insulation between the paneling and the metal exterior. There was propane tanks, 2 of them, 1 on either side. Had to be balanced, of course, so that it could rotate. Had to have special permission from Saanich to load it, because at that time propane tanks had to be X number of feet clear of a building, and it had to turn with the building. That was too expensive. I only used it once, and I instead heated it with this great big round red thing that looked like a buoy from out in the ocean someplace that Barney had built. It wasn't airtight, but man, when that thing heated up, I had to have the doors open, and it heated the place so well. My kids loved living there. I was talking to my son last night, and he said, you know, Mama, it was my favorite place I've ever lived. So I thought it was kind of neat that he said that. But the point that I'm trying to make, I could go on forever about Barney, and like every sheet of paneling was different. Every room had a different colored paneling, a different drape at every window, and he had them made to order. He did that on purpose. And there was a big slab of cedar, I guess. I don't know what kind of, great big trees that had slabs, and it was standing upright when I moved in, and there was a big sign on it saying, hand built by B. Oldfield, no sticks, no nails, no mud. And then the tractor that Christy talked about, one of the tractors, was in the workshop, and that was really fun. My son, he just loved going in that workshop because every nut and bolt and piece of metal that Barney ever touched was stored in there. There was stuff in the rafters. It was just a gold mine. But one of the tractors was in there, and it had a sign on it saying, built in the late hungry, dirty 30s. It was just so unique compared to any other place, and the teardrop was there too for a long time while I lived there. So it was, because I talked to Rob that one day, he let me live there. We became friends. I realized within a very short period of time what a great community Prospect Lake was, because I lived further away from Prospect Lake. My kids went to the school, but I just felt so grateful to Rob for letting me live there, and we've become friends for life. Well, that was in 1979, so I could go on forever about Barney and living in the house. It was really fun. I'll tell you, when you're a single woman living in a roundhouse that rotates, it helped. Anyway, that's all I'll say, because I think we're out of time. But thank you very much.
So thank you all for coming today, and thanks especially to Rob and the Oldfield family. And if we've whet your appetite, we'll see you at the Saanich Fair, September 2024, where we're featuring the Oldfield Valley and the Oldfield family.